Crown for Two by Jansen Davies. Chapter 1. The Throne Without a King. Storms bruised the skies over Taldris as the ancient planet mourned the death of King Siren. No heir stood to claim his crystalline throne, and the silence of succession pulled old rivalries taut. Amid the crackle of lightning, the alien Wernak collective began their march, keen to annex Taldris into its cold dominion. The noble factions of Dael and Nerith, once bonded in defense, had fractured across generations. Now they bristled with suspicion and pride. Yet one soul from each faction stepped forward, not with banners, but with blood-bound will. Amara Dael, war-born tactician, carried fire in her gaze and precision in her stance. Her armor glinted with the crest of her house, but it was the defiant curve of her mouth that unsettled her enemies. Daxar Nerith, the cosmic warlord, arrived in full battle armor bearing truth and silence like twin blades. His movements spoke of grace earned through exile, his eyes unreadable but too watchful to ignore. Their first meeting unfolded within the ruins of the old conclave, where flickering lights cast fractured halos on shattered glass. What should have been a negotiation bordered instead on confrontation. But as Amara's fingers hovered near her blade and Daxar's brow remained calmly arched, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, not of lineage, not of duty, but of loneliness cloaked in strength. "She'd rather challenge the stars than serve them," Daxar said after she refused the Wernak's ultimatum. Amara turned. "And you'd rather kill them than live among them." That night, as their families demanded dominance and revenge, the two forged something quieter in the shadows of collapsing empires. The alliance wasn't born of politics. It was stitched from the moment Amara hesitated before striking, and Daxar offered silence as a balm to her rage. Together, they built the Aegis frame, battle-forged robots with programming tailored to mimic human adaptability and emotion. And somewhere beneath the code and strategy, they began to mimic something of each other. The war loomed, but before steel clashed, there was fire, and it flickered between them, dangerous and pure. Chapter 2. Inheritance of Fire. The night winds across Taldris whispered through metallic branches and fractured spires, carrying the weight of broken lineages. Beneath the remnants of the old conclave, Amara Dael and Daxar Nerith stood in the glow of flickering sensors, blueprint projections casting ghostly shadows as they sketched out the improbable, a joint army. The Aegis frame was more than code and combat. Each unit infused with responsiveness, adaptability, and a sliver of ethical logic. They would not just destroy, they would protect. In designing them, Daxar noticed the way Amara's fingers lingered over command protocols, like an artist sculpting fire. She noticed the way he paused before finalizing decisions, as though consulting ghosts only he could hear. "I never imagined a Nerith would understand compassion," Amara muttered as they debated restraint algorithms. "I never imagined a Dael would consider it," Daxar replied, but his smile was gentle. Their factions watched with thinly veiled contempt. Years of bloodshed couldn't be undone by one alliance. Yet Amara and Daxar kept building. They argued, laughed once, and shared stories beneath the hum of interface screens. She told him about her mother's final mission. He told her about the stars he mapped when exile as a mercenary felt safer than war. They worked late into the night, alone but not lonely, trust built in data exchanges and accidental brushes of fingers when reaching across the console. One evening, fatigue made Amara rest her head against the cold panel beside Daxar, and for a long moment, he didn't move. The silence wasn't tactical, it was personal. "I thought the alliance would be mechanical," Amara murmured. He turned toward her, eyes uncertain but searching. "It feels like it could be something else." Before words could deepen, The alert rang. Wernak warships breached orbit. They rose, no longer just heirs of rival houses, but leaders of a revolution. And while neither would speak of what flickered between them, it had begun. Quietly, powerfully. As the first Aegis frame units powered up and their joint troops mobilized, the planet stirred with hope. The throne was still unclaimed. But somewhere in the chaos, something truer than bloodlines was taking root. Chapter 3. The Empire Descends. They came like a storm forged from fire. The Wernak Collective broke through Taldris's outer defenses with elegant brutality. Gravity spears raining from their dreadnoughts, cities collapsing in geometric spirals. Their soldiers weren't born, they were synthesized, blank-eyed enforcers with minds wired for conquest. Civilization frayed. Yet Taldris did not yield. Amara Dael took the northern front with her Aegis frames, robotic warriors calibrated for rapid adaptation. They mirrored her combat style, swift, ruthless, poetic in destruction. Daxar Nerith commanded the eastern resistance, his units wielding strategic brutality, creating corridors for civilian escape. Communication between them was crisp, terse, efficient, except in the quiet hours when coordination slipped into curiosity. Amara began noticing the way Daxar's holograms always paused before projecting troop movements, as though waiting for her silent confirmation. He noticed she didn't laugh, but her eyes softened when he made dry observations, like calling the Wernick war drones poorly trained insects. During a nighttime skirmish on the plains of Myran, Amara nearly lost her Aegis commander unit to a cloaked ambush. Daxar, monitoring from a distant outpost, rerouted his fleet mid-engagement, violating tactical protocol to intervene. Afterwards, soaked in reactor dust and adrenaline, they argued. "You shouldn't have come," she said, armor scorched. "You shouldn't have needed saving," he replied. A beat, then a glance, then nothing. But something had shifted. Their war had become a dance, their alliance a tether. News spread. The resistance was holding. Unlikely victories bloomed where Amara and Daxar converged. Civilians whispered that the heirs weren't just fighting for the throne. They were learning one another, stitching together Taldris's fate with every shared glance and recalibrated strategy. That night, beneath the fractured dome of a downed Wernak sentinel, they stood together in silence, watching the Aegis frames recalibrate. "We're winning," Amara said. Daxar nodded, then looked at her. "We are." She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. And amid machines built for war, something human began to stir. Chapter 4. The Heart of Steel. Victory never came without loss. Pyra Fortress, once Taldris's technological heart, now stood in ruins, a shattered monument to resistance and defiance. The Wernak's latest assault had left the city charred, its sky veiled in plasma smoke. Amid the devastation, Daxar led a counter-offensive that stretched his forces too thin. Amara warned him. He didn't listen. She arrived just in time to see him fall. Wounded by a kinetic surge and half-buried in collapsed infrastructure, Daxar lay unconscious beneath a crumpled Aegis frame. Amara's command team begged her to retreat. Instead, she tore off her helmet, dropped command protocol, and plunged into the wreckage herself. The air hissed with collapsing circuitry and whispered with death. She reached him, barely breathing, fractured ribs, a neural bleed threatening his cognition. Cradling him in her arms beneath flickering emergency light, Amara whispered things only he would hear. That he was foolish, that she should hate him, that she couldn't stop thinking about him. Daxar stirred, just enough to say her name, not as a general, but as a man holding on to something binding him to the world. She ordered her troops to reroute every medical unit and delayed evacuation until he was stabilized. It cost them ground, it cost her reputation, but she never flinched. For 2 days, as Taldris shook, she stayed beside him, and when he woke, pain clouded but smiling faintly, he said, "You came for me." "I wasn't going to let the Wernak steal my best strategist," she replied, but her voice cracked on the word strategist. In his absence, the Aegis frames struggled to adapt, mimicking their leader's hesitation. Daxar, still recovering, proposed a radical solution, integrating the late King Seiran's secret technology, core empathy modules. "I built them to fight," Amara said, unsure. "You built them to defend," Daxar countered. "Now let's teach them to feel." Together, they rewired the core processors to make choices based on situational ethics and emotional signals, creating machines that could protect not only with steel, but with intention. As they worked, their hands brushed again. Neither pulled away. The world kept burning. But inside the command citadel, something gentler forged its way forward, between recalibrated circuits and shared silence, between stolen glances and the soft cadence of rebuilding trust. They were becoming something new, not just co-commanders, not just heirs, but heartbeats intertwined in a war that had begun to remember love. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. The plains of Darvo trembled beneath war. Wernak's sovereign ship loomed overhead, a floating fortress veined with quantum arrays and energy cannons that could level mountains. The final battle had begun, and Taldris felt the weight of everything: legacy, survival, love, pressing into its bones. Amara stood at the ridge, wind slicing across her armor, the glow of her Aegis frames painting her silhouette in cold gold. Daxar joined her, half-healed but resolute, his gaze tracing the lines of battle and the shape of her mouth before words drew it away. "I've never said this," he murmured, barely audible beneath the hum of war machines. "I don't know if it will matter." Amara didn't turn. Her jaw tightened. "Say it anyway." Before he could speak, the Aegis elites launched their assault. The duo followed, boarding the sovereign ship in a blaze of synchronized precision, flanked by 3 upgraded units, pulsing with empathy-enhanced algorithms. Inside, the battle was a nightmare in code and rage. Wernak scientists twisted time, weaponizing causality. The ship itself bent reality in increments, distorting sound and motion. Yet, Amara and Daxar fought like tide and flame, balancing each other, guarding each other, bleeding for each other. At the core, they found General Thros, bio-augmented, spliced from 6 species, his voice fractured minds. He offered them a place in the Empire. They declined. The fight was brutal. Daxar took a neural strike meant for Amara. She disabled Thros's Isai armor with a blade fused from Aegis memory chips. They shattered him together, not as soldiers, as something more. Outside, the Aegis frame breached the ship's hull. The fortress crumbled. Wernak forces scattered. Taldris erupted in flame, but not defeat. On the way down, suspended in a gravity disruption field, their fingers found each other. "If we die," Amara said, voice ragged, "this was enough." He looked at her, blood along his temple, smile weak and radiant. "Number I want more." Then gravity returned. They crashed into victory. Chapter 6. 2 names, 1 crown. The war had ended. Wernak's banner hung in ruins, their fleet shattered across orbit like ashes scattered on wind. The survivors of Taldris gathered beneath the gleaming spire of the throne, not to mourn but to decide. It should have been political. Instead, it was human. Amara Dial and Daxar Nerith stood side by side as their factions arrived, eyes still bruised from loss, hope stitched into fresh wounds. Neither raised their voice, neither demanded crown or title. They simply stood close, closer than they ever had in public, as if proximity itself whispered what words couldn't. "I used to dream of ruling alone," Amara said softly. "I used to dream of being left alone," Daxar replied. They looked out at Taldris, at the people who had fought and fractured and chosen something new. The nobles waited. The citizens watched. Then Amara reached for Daxar's hand, and when he didn't flinch, when his fingers tightened around hers like they'd been waiting for centuries, she turned to the crowd and said, "We will rule together, not because we must, but because we want to." A hush fell over the spire, then a cheer that cracked the sky. The throne accepted two rulers that day, not heirs of conquest, but architects of unity. King Daxar, Queen Amara, bound not just by war's end, but by every impossible choice they survived together. Their coronation was less ceremony, more vow, not to repeat history, but rewrite it. That night, in the silence of the palace gardens, Amara leaned against Daxar's shoulder. "Still think this is politics?" she teased. He kissed her temple and murmured, "This is poetry." Epilogue. Beneath starlight. Years passed. Taldris healed, slowly, beautifully. Cities rose again beneath the light of twin moons, stitched together not by conquest, but by compromise. The Aegis frame no longer marched in formation. It tended gardens, taught history, watched over children born into peace. In the palace at the heart of Crown Spire, King Daxar and Queen Amara ruled side by side. Their counsel was measured, their decrees wise, but it was the way they looked at each other, still, that shaped the soul of the kingdom. Like fire learning stillness, like silence choosing speech. Some nights Amara wandered the archives while Daxar mapped constellations onto ceilings. He claimed he saw patterns in the stars that reminded him of her. One evening they stood atop the spire, wind dancing through metallic vines. Amara leaned into Daxar's side and whispered, "Do you think we'll be remembered as rulers?" He smiled without looking. "Number, I think we'll be remembered as the ones who listened." She laughed, that rare, amber-smooth sound that once meant fury and now meant comfort. Below them, Taldris glowed with contentment. Above them, space waited, patient and infinite. Together they watched it, hand in hand, no wars, no crowns. Just then, in their rare moment of stolen silence, their three children rushed in, demanding a bedtime story. A very heroic bedtime story, with no mushy stuff. The end. Please like and subscribe.